My name is Delia. I was 33 years old that night, and I had spent 6 years quietly teaching myself to need less so that the man I married would never have a reason to leave. I want you to sit with that for a second, because if you have ever made yourself smaller to keep the peace, if you have ever rehearsed an apology for something that wasn't your fault before the other person even walked in the room, then you already know my story better than you think you do. And before we go any further, I have to ask you something, and I really do want your answer down in the comments. What is the one moment in your life you should never have had to face alone? The one where you looked around and realized the person who promised to show up simply chose not to. Tell me. I'll be reading. The nurse's name was Imani, and she had warm hands and a steadiness in her voice that I have never forgotten. She kept saying, "You're doing this, you're already doing this," like she was narrating something brave instead of something lonely. When the first wave of real pain came through, I heard myself laugh, an ugly little broken laugh, because the absurdity of it hit me all at once. 3 weeks early, my water had broken on the kitchen floor while I was rinsing a coffee mug, and I had called him 8 times in the cab, and he had answered exactly once, for 9 seconds, to say he was in the middle of the toast and he'd come when he could, and that the doctors do all the work anyway. The doctors do all the work anyway. I held on to that sentence like a splinter for a long time after. She came at 2:14 in the morning, 7 pounds, 1 ounce, a full head of dark hair and a cry that filled the whole room, and I named her Esme right there on the spot because it was the only name that had ever felt like mine and not a compromise. Imani laid her on my chest, and I felt something crack open in me that had been welded shut for years, and for about 90 seconds the world was perfect. Then my phone buzzed again, and because my hands were shaking and my heart was already shredded, I picked it up, and there it was, a video. Brennan had posted it to the family group, the one with his mother and his sister and the cousins, the one where everyone always told him how golden he was. In the video he is glowing, tie loosened, glass raised, and somebody off camera shouts, "Where's Delia? Shouldn't you be at the hospital?" And Brennan laughs, this big easy laugh, and says the line that I would end up hearing in my sleep for months. "You didn't need me there. You're stronger when I'm not around, baby." And the whole table laughs with him. I want to tell you I threw the phone. I want to tell you I screamed. But that's not what conditioning does to a person. What I actually did was stare at the ceiling with my brand new daughter breathing against my collarbone, and the first complete thought that formed in my mind was, maybe he's right. Maybe I am stronger alone. Maybe I'm making this into something bigger than it is. That is what years of being managed will do to you. It turns the cruelty inward. It makes you the one apologizing. He showed up the next morning at 10:40, smelling faintly of last night's restaurant, holding a gas station bouquet and a coffee for himself only. He looked at Esme for maybe 4 seconds, said she had his nose, and then spent the next 20 minutes on the phone in the hallway because the promotion paperwork needed a signature and corporate doesn't wait for babies. When the nurse asked if he wanted to learn the safe way to hold her, he waved his hand and said, "Delia's a natural, she's got it," and winked at me like he was paying me a compliment. The old me smiled back. I actually smiled back. I hate that I did, but I'm telling you the truth, because the truth is the whole point of this. They sent us home 2 days later, and this is where I need you to meet Loretta, because no man becomes Brennan without a mother who builds him a throne out of everyone else's silence. Loretta was waiting in our living room when we walked in, sitting in the good chair, and she did not stand up to see the baby. She looked at me over the top of her glasses, and the first words out of her mouth, before hello, before congratulations, were, "You really couldn't have held on 3 more weeks. You embarrassed him at his own dinner. You know how important last night was." I stood there in the doorway holding my 2-day-old daughter, still bleeding, still cracked from the inside out, and I said I was sorry. I apologized to her. To this day, that's the part I can't fully explain to people who haven't lived it. So let me stop and ask you, right here, because I genuinely need to know I wasn't the only one who has ever folded like that. When someone you trusted blamed you for your own pain, when they handed you the guilt for something they did you swallow it the way I did, or did you have the spine I didn't have yet? Comment it. Be honest. There is no wrong answer. There's only the truth of where you were standing. The next few weeks blurred into a fog of 2 hours sleep and a quiet I mistook for peace. Brennan got his title, regional director, and with it came dinners and trips and a version of him that was charming to absolutely everyone except the woman raising his child. He started telling the story of that night, and here is the thing about a charming man. He doesn't lie loudly, he revises softly. To his friends, the story became, Delia went into labor early and wouldn't let me leave my own promotion. Can you believe she wanted me to throw away years of work? To his sister, it became, the baby came so fast, there was genuinely no time for me to get there. To his mother, it didn't even need to be revised, because Loretta had already decided the truth before she heard it. And the most frightening part, the part that should scare you if you've ever been close to a man like this, is that I started to wonder which version was real. I had been there, I had lived every second of it, and I still started to wonder. I almost let it all go. I want you to understand how close I came to simply absorbing it and calling it marriage. But what I didn't know yet was that the moment everything turned wasn't going to be some dramatic confrontation. It was going to be one ordinary sentence from a woman I barely knew. Imani, the night nurse, had given me her cell number before we left the hospital, the way some nurses do, scribbled on the back of a feeding schedule pamphlet, in case you have questions about the latch, she'd said. 3 weeks in, exhausted, leaking, half convinced I was the problem in my own house, I texted her a question about Esme's feeding. She answered kindly, and then, almost as an afterthought, she wrote, "And how are you doing? Not the baby, you." I stared at that for a long time. Nobody had asked me that, and before I could stop myself, I told her the truth, all of it, the toast, the video, the line, Loretta, the slow rewriting of the night. And Imani wrote back something I will carry until I die. She wrote, "Delia, I was in that room with you. I know exactly what happened. Don't let anyone make you doubt a night I witnessed with my own eyes. I know exactly what happened. Something in me went very, very still. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was clarity, cold and clean, like the first breath of air after you've been underwater longer than you meant to be." Because she was right. I hadn't imagined it. There was a witness. There were timestamps. There was a video he had posted himself, with his own face and his own voice and his own laughter. The old me would have spent another year trying to be understood. But the woman sitting on that nursery floor at 3 a.m, with a sleeping daughter and a buzzing phone, did not need to be understood anymore. She needed to be believed, and believing herself turned out to be enough. I stopped arguing that week. I want you to notice that, because it's the most important thing I did. I stopped explaining myself to Brennan, stopped defending the timeline at dinners, stopped flinching when Loretta brought up the embarrassment. And in the silence where my apologies used to be, I started doing something else entirely. I started saving everything. I screen recorded the toast video before it could disappear, with the date and the timestamp visible. I saved the 8 outgoing calls from the night of the birth. Every one logged, the 9-second one circled in my mind like evidence in a file. I went back through 2 years of texts, and I saw it then. The pattern I'd been living inside of and couldn't see. The small dismissals, the canceled appointments, the times he'd moved money out of our joint account into one I wasn't on. For taxes, he'd said, for flexibility. I had never looked. The conditioned wife doesn't look. But this new woman, the one Imani had accidentally woken up, this woman looked at all of it with dry eyes and a steady hand, and she made copies, and she kept them somewhere safe, and she said nothing. I need you to do something with me right here, because we're at the part of the story where I stopped being a victim and started being a witness to my own life. Pause for a second and tell me down in the comments, at what point would you have started writing it all down? Was it the toast, the video, Loretta in the good chair, or would you, like the old me, have waited too long? I'm asking because I think the answer says everything about how we're raised, and I want to read where you would have drawn your line. Here is what I learned about men who have never once faced a consequence. They do not stop. They cannot. The lack of resistance reads to them as permission, and permission to a man like Brennan is just an invitation to take more. So when he sat me down in the kitchen one evening, with Esme asleep down the hall, and slid a stack of papers across the table, I already had a feeling the rope was getting longer, and he was the one holding the end of it. It was a post-nuptial agreement, drafted by a lawyer who happened to be his golf partner, and it was generous, he said. It protected the family, he said. What it actually did, in language he assumed I was too tired and too trained to read carefully, was assign him the house, the larger accounts, and primary custody of Esme in the event of a separation, on the grounds, and I am quoting the document, that the mother had demonstrated instability around the time of the birth. Instability. He had written my abandonment into a legal weapon and pointed it at me. The old me would have cried and signed it to keep the peace. I have to tell you what I actually did, because it surprised even me. I asked him, very calmly, if I could take a few days to read it, the way a reasonable adult reviews any contract. He smiled, because calm from me had always meant compliance, and he said, of course, take your time, it's just a formality. And then he did the thing that men like him always do when they think they've already won. He got comfortable. He bragged. He told his mother it was handled. He told his golf partner lawyer it was as good as signed. He even told his sister, in a text I would later read, that Delia's finally being smart about this. She knows the baby's better off with structure. Every reassurance he gave someone else was another sentence in his own confession. Every excuse became another receipt. Stay with me here, because what happened next is the reason I'm able to tell you this story from a kitchen that is now entirely my own. I did not sign it. Instead, I took that post-nuptial agreement, and the toast video, and the call logs, and the bank transfers, and the texts, and I brought them to a family law attorney named Pascal, a quiet man with tired, kind eyes who had clearly seen this exact shape of cruelty 100 times before. He read everything without saying a word, and when he finished, he set the papers down and looked at me and said, "Delia, this isn't a custody risk for you. This is a self-portrait of him, and he doesn't even know he painted it." He explained that the document Brennan had drafted, the one meant to prove me unstable, actually established on paper that Brennan was aware I had given birth that night and had chosen to characterize my labor as instability rather than acknowledge his own absence. The video did the rest. A man cannot post himself laughing about not being at his child's birth and then credibly argue in a custody proceeding that the mother is the unreliable parent. He had, in his own confident hand, built the case against himself. The reckoning didn't happen in a courtroom with a gavel, the way the movies promise. It happened across a wide table in a mediation room, fluorescent and ordinary, with Brennan on one side flanked by his golf partner lawyer and, because he could never resist an audience, his mother Loretta in the row of chairs against the wall. He walked in the way he always walked into rooms, like applause was just running a little late. He thought this was the day I'd finally fold in front of the people he most wanted to impress. Pascal didn't raise his voice. He simply laid the timeline on the table, the 8 calls, the timestamps, the post-nuptial language about instability, and then he asked, with no drama at all, if Brennan would like to explain the contents of a video he had personally posted on the night in question, and he played it. In that small, bright room, Brennan's own voice filled the air, glass raised, that big, easy laugh, "You didn't need me there, you're stronger when I'm not around, baby," and the whole recorded table laughing along. I watched it land. I watched the confidence drain out of his face, the way color leaves a room when a cloud crosses the sun. I watched his lawyer go very still and stop writing, and I watched Loretta, who had spent her whole life arranging the truth to flatter her son, hear his actual voice say the cruelest thing out loud, and for the first time in the years I'd known her, she had absolutely nothing to say. She looked at the floor. The throne she'd built came apart in the silence. He tried, of course. He said it was a joke. He said it was taken out of context, and Pascal asked, gently, what the correct context for that sentence might possibly be. There wasn't one. There is no context in which a man laughing about skipping his daughter's birth becomes the responsible parent in the room. The postnuptial agreement evaporated. The custody argument collapsed under the weight of his own posted laughter. By the time we walked out, the version of the night that Brennan had spent months carefully revising was gone, and the only version left standing was the one Imani and I had lived, the true one, the one with timestamps. It cost him more than the marriage. The man who lived for the admiration of his family and his colleagues had to sit in a room and watch that admiration recalculate in real time. His sister stopped returning his calls after she saw the video for herself. The company that had just made him regional director does not love a public spectacle, and an image-built career does not survive its own foundation cracking in front of witnesses. He kept the title for a while, but the golden glow he'd toasted to that night never quite came back. He had been so busy performing for the people in the room that he never noticed the room had been watching the whole time. I'd love to tell you I felt triumphant. The honest truth is that mostly I felt tired, and underneath the tired, something quieter and steadier, something I hadn't felt in 6 years. The morning after the mediation, I woke up before Esme for once, and I sat on the floor of her nursery in the gray early light, and I listened to her breathe. There was no phone buzzing, there was no toast to dread, no story being rewritten somewhere about who I was. There was just a window going slowly gold and a little girl who would grow up knowing, because I would make sure of it, that her mother had stopped apologizing for surviving. I am not the woman who smiled back in that hospital room anymore. I lost something to get here, a kind of softness, a willingness to believe that love means making yourself small enough to fit inside someone else's convenience, and I don't think that part of me is ever fully coming back. But I gained the only thing that turned out to matter. I gained myself, and my daughter, and a quiet house where no one tells me that my pain was an inconvenience. He thought I was stronger when he wasn't around. The cruelest thing about that sentence is that he was right, just not in the way he meant it, and he will spend a long time understanding why. So here is what I'll leave you with, and then I want your answer. Sometimes the people who hurt us hand us the very proof that sets us free, and our only job is to stop apologizing long enough to pick it up. If you were lying in that delivery room, holding your newborn, and that video came across your screen, tell me honestly, would you have stayed quiet the way I almost did, or would you have started keeping receipts that very night? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. This story is a work of fiction, created for entertainment purposes only.